I'm Marissa Norcross.
And I'm Dave Freund, and this is The Next Page. Hello, Marissa. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. How are you?
I am doing terrific. The sun is shining.
Mm-hmm.
The rain has stopped.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at least for the next 20 minutes it stopped. Do you have a lot of water in your yard?
Surprisingly, no, but I'm also not sure how wet the ground is.
Okay.
I don't have any standing water, and it doesn't look like anything bad happened.
I went out with my lawn tractor to cut my grass, and I had a wake. There were waves coming off the front tires. It was like, forget it. And that's my front yard that is usually dry up by the house. Anyways, it's just awful.
I know, but, well, let's see.
Well.
April showers brought May showers.
Which hopefully are bringing May flowers, right?
Which hopefully means that, like, summer's going to be great. I don't know.
I hope so.
That's the Farmer's Almanac prediction, I think, is that it's going to be warmer and drier than usual.
You know what's interesting? Last night, I watched News Channel 9's video clip on what's the summer going to be like, and that's exactly what they said, based on the winter we had and the month of May so far.
Interesting.
So, hey, must be right.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not why we're here, even though I digressed.
No.
We're here because we didn't finish up our questions last week, did we?
No, we didn't. Surprisingly. I thought we were.
I thought we would.
But we got going and we got chatting. So
we did. And we had a great question that came in after last week's episode, which is what I wrote about this week. Because it was such a great question. I don't know if I've ever addressed this question. And the question was, if a person is an introverted behavior profile, which would be a high S for steadiness or high C for compliance, can they really lead? Is it, or are they just kind of hampered by the fact that they're introverted? And absolutely they can lead. And I honestly think that in many cases they can lead better than those of us that might be high Ds or high Is. Because they're, especially if they have a significant amount of S. A significant amount of S is going to have them focus on processes. They're going to focus on how things get done. They're also going to focus on the relationships with people. So S's are high in relationship, even though they're introverted, and they are somewhat task oriented. Not quite as task oriented as, let's say, a C, but they have a high relational orientation. And so I decided that I was going to do some research, and there were 2 presidents of the United States that were high S's. And both were military geniuses. Now that, when I started thinking about that one really threw me for a curve, because you would think that your military people are like your General Patton that are going to just charge into areas, guns blazing. But actually, the 2 presidents that we had that were also military men were George Washington, our first president, and Dwight Eisenhower, our 34th president. So we know that George Washington, was the general that was responsible for us winning the Revolutionary War. And Eisenhower actually ended up being the supreme commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces in Europe. He ended up being the NATO commander for pretty much all of NATO, and really was instrumental in establishing all of that so that we could begin the Marshall Plan following World War II and so on. Helping implement, clearly the Marshall Plan was drawn up by Marshall, but it was Eisenhower's efforts that had a lot to do with that. And another interesting fact was that, and this throws people for a curve, during the Eisenhower administration, there was not one U.S. combat casualty. So no combat casualties in the 8 years that he was president of the United States.
Wow.
And high S. He was elected because of what he was able to do in World War II. He was elected certainly because of his character as well. And just to give you, there is a story I want to share about Eisenhower, because there's a lot more written about Eisenhower than let's say Washington. When General Eisenhower was getting ready to launch the D-Day invasion, he was faced with a lot of data that said that there would be huge loss of life. And on top of that, there was a lot of stormy weather in England at the time. And the night that he gave the orders to launch, he asked for one last report from his meteorologist. There was a staff meteorologist, and the meteorologist said, General Eisenhower, you have a window of, I forgot exactly how many hours, but he said, after this window, a massive low pressure system is going to work its way into England, and which would prohibit them from bringing troops back.
Mm-hmm.
And they said that he stared out the window for a while, turned around and made the decision to send the ships and then send the planes. And then he and his aide went to the air base where all of the flyers would take off from. And this is where you're going to see the S part in his behavior profile. He addressed the troops. He actually had a prayer with the troops. And then he asked his aide to drive him to the end of the airstrip where he watched every single plane take off. Once the last plane took off, he turned to walk back to the car, and his aide said he had tears streaming down his cheeks.
Mm-hmm.
Because he realized that a lot of those airmen would not be coming back. So that's the power of a leader that's an introvert. So what a leader needs to do, whether they're an introvert or an extrovert, is really know that self-awareness piece about your behavior profile, and then maximize your strengths and staff your weaknesses. So if you're not this super outgoing person that can give these amazing inspirational talks, get somebody on your team that can. But just be true to who you are, and you really can be an amazing leader, simply leveraging the strengths in your behavior profile and staffing those areas that you may not be strong in. So I don't know, did I answer that question enough?
Yeah, I think you did.
Okay.
I always love listening to you talk about DISC, so
I don't think in any way a leader loses their effectiveness because they're more introverted.
Mm-hmm.
They just need to work through it and work around it.
Mm-hmm.
And hey, talk with people. Talk with people on your team if this is something you're struggling with, and ask them. And just remember, Washington was able to do it. Eisenhower was able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
You can do it too.
Mm-hmm.
So what's our next question?
All right, so now we're going to pick back up with where we left off last week, which, as a reminder, last episode was our 100th,
Right.
and we talked about the past, present, and future of the next page. So we covered a lot of the past in episode 100 and some of the present, and now we're going to talk a little bit more through some of the questions we got and then discuss the future. Hopefully we get to finish these all these questions and get to talk about the future. So,
well, if I just give shorter answers, we'll be fine.
Some of these I think are quick questions. Others might take a little bit longer. So the question where we left off was for you, and it is, how do you encourage leadership to change and be more forward-thinking and efficient when they're a supervisor?
So my guess is, if I understand the question right, this person maybe works for someone is that the way you would understand it, that is not forward thinking?
That's what I was reading. That's what I thought. Yes.
Yeah. I think in a scenario like that, there's a great book. I would encourage anybody to read it, called The 360-Degree Leader by John Maxwell. And in that, John says, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. So you can influence up to your boss.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you have a boss that perhaps just hasn't thought that through yet, you can ask them questions.
Mm-hmm.
You could say, what thoughts do you have about the future for our team? Do you have some ideas? Do you have a vision?
Mm-hmm.
Would you be willing to share it with me? You literally lead your boss to a different level of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'll be honest with you, what's going to happen is if the boss doesn't get that, if the supervisor doesn't pick up on that, pretty soon the organization's going to realize that supervisor's not leading.
Mm-hmm.
And then the people that are forward thinking, that have a vision, will be the ones that will be tapped to lead the organization forward.
Mm-hmm.
So I would try to lean in. Typically what we try to do when we have a difficult situation like that, or a bit of a conflict, we withdraw. No, lean in, and try to influence your supervisor to be more forward thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that book, The 360 Leader, is a great book.
And I think that kind of answers the next question too, which again was what motivates business owners and C-level execs to be open to learning what they don't know?
Yeah. Here's the problem with a lot of, I hate to use the term leaders because they're not, but bosses with authority. Maybe you own a company, but unless you're willing to admit there's things you don't know, you're trapped.
Yeah.
I was there. I was stuck in this idea that I had the answers and I was really good when in fact I really wasn't. I was, our organizations get to a point and then we hold them back as bosses unless we're really willing to grow. So there's a couple ways of what motivates business owners? Failure. And some that will, and those that will be able to, like you said, lean in, getting back to the last question, someone's helping them see what maybe they don't know in a very non-threatening way. And oftentimes it might be you introduce them to somebody. So let's say I own a company and I'm not recognizing the fact that I really need to change or grow or embrace something. If somebody can introduce me to a leader that really gets it, I may be, interested. It might pique my interest. I would just, have the tough conversations, but do it politely. Do it politely. Do it respectfully, and just say, hey, I think we might be missing something here. Have you thought about this? And see what they say. Another great one is just to share to people. Look, we've done really well in the past, but tomorrow's going to demand a better version of our organization than yesterday did. And then maybe you just share, Marshall Goldsmith's, what got you there here won't get you there. How are we going to react? How are we going to respond? How are we positioning ourselves for the next 5 years? And if you ask some tough questions politely, that may wake them up. So that's kind of the way I would view that one.
Yeah, so some crucial conversations happening.
Yes. Yeah,
sure.
And don't be afraid of having a crucial conversation. You just have to understand when the conversation becomes threatening for the person that you're speaking with. If you're going to have this conversation, either with your supervisor or with an owner or an exec in the C-suite, you have to make sure it's a safe conversation for them. And if we begin to be condescending, judgmental, critical, it all of a sudden they lose the security of the conversation and the walls go up. I would also take some time to assess what their DISC behavior is. So if they are outgoing and direct, they're a D. If they're outgoing and more polite and fun, they're an I. If they're reserved and pleasant, and a little bit more on the relationship side, they're an S. And if they're reserved and very data-driven, matter-of-fact, and speak without much emotion, they're a C. And so you have to understand that Ds, their greatest fear is being taken advantage of. So you just, make sure that you can position anything so that a D realizes if I don't make a shift, somebody may take advantage of our company, kind of thing. The I's are always, their greatest fear is being accused of causing harm or losing, a friendship, kind of thing. S's are very fearful of change. They're also concerned about the relationship piece. And C's are afraid of being wrong and making mistakes. So if we can get to the greatest fears, we're good to go. I know I just taught you how to manipulate people, but that's okay. It's only bad if you manipulate them for evil purposes. So.
All right. Well, now we're going to move into some lighter questions, I guess.
Okay, you go first.
And some of these are fun. So one question that we got was, how/why did you come to MACNY? So you've been with MACNY kind of for a long time, if you really count out the training you've been doing, which we do.
Yeah, I was training for MACNY all the way back in 1995. So
And
were you even born?
Yes.
Okay.
I was waiting for that. What did you start? What was your what class did you start with? Like, what was your first engagement with MACNY?
So MACNY had a 3-level program back then called Tomorrow's Leaders Today.
Mm.
And actually, it might have been a 2-level program. And my dad decided in 1995 that he wanted to start going to Florida. He was retiring, and he went to Florida part-time. So when he was gone, they needed somebody to fill in for him. So I was a substitute teacher, so to speak, at MACNY. Shortly after that, they made it a 3-level program, and my dad taught the first 10 weeks, and I taught the second 10 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And then MACNY had a series of people that taught the 3rd level of 10 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where it started. But I became a MACNY employee, full-time employee. Well, we mentioned it last week on December 21st, 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And the why was I never planned to leave the company I was running, but I wanted to, at some point, do executive coaching and leadership development, and Randy knew that. I had actually started a business called Navigate Leadership, which I still kind of keep on the side.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, come do it now. So I kind of walked away from my corporate job and joined MACNY. How about you?
So I came to MACNY in September of 2014 because I had been working for a magazine and they were no longer going to be publishing. So I found myself in a position to find something new. And I initially came into MACNY on the membership side. That's the role I started in, which then I started working more with Karen and doing more of the communications things. We got a new website. I had a lot of interest in doing that. So I actually shifted my role sometime probably in 2015, maybe 2015, 2016. I can't remember. Maybe it was it was 2016, I think. And you know, I think the why did I come to MACNY? I think I really liked the size. I'd worked for a large company before that, and when I interviewed at MACNY, I just really felt like the mission sat well with me. I agreed with what was going on. I really liked the people that I had been interviewing with. I liked the small office, which at the time was about almost like half of what we have now. I mean, we've grown so much since I've joined MACNY.
Right.
And it's just been really great. I mean, MACNY has offered me a lot of opportunities for growth, and you know, my position has really evolved so much since I started, and in so many great ways.
Cool.
Yeah.
I think it has. I mean, I've seen it evolve since you've been there, and you've really grown into different roles, which is fun to watch.
Mm-hmm.
So, my turn to ask a question. So, what have you learned over the past 99 episodes, and what challenges have you faced, or do you think we faced?
Well, I've learned a lot just because, you know, listening to you for 100 weeks and learning from you.
Not many people can put up with me for 100 weeks.
So, I mean, I think I've learned along with our listeners because, you know, you're the one who is really the brain behind all of the posts that you write and what we talk about each week. So I've learned right along with everyone else. Challenges, I think just more like growing pains, really, like figuring out how we were going to get from episode 1 to where we are now. We've learned along the way. Like, we used to think that we needed to record in the same room, and we had, you know, we had our sound shield things, and we had like our little routine and
Studio 7.
Yes, and then our studio, and then we kind of realized, like, hey, it actually makes more sense if we don't do this in the same room, and just figuring things out. I mean, another challenge was working through my maternity leave, figuring out what we were going to do, and I think I was out about 16 weeks, and of those 16 weeks, we pre-recorded 8 of them. And so, you know, we doubled up on weeks and we fit them in, and then we had interviews for the other 8 weeks. which was really interesting, and I enjoyed listening to those too. So I think really just growing. What about you?
Yeah. Yeah, what have I learned? My learning and my challenge kind of go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot harder than you think it's going to be to try to come up with something meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is I don't want, I keep, every time I write, I try to figure out what can I do to add value to the person that's going to read this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want it, I don't want people to just delete it, or read it and say, well, that was a waste. So my goal is always, how can I make it applicable? A lot of times it's what I'm learning, so I just have to keep learning so that there's something there. The other thing I realized is doing a couple episodes without you. Wow, that was really hard. And so then I realized that how much I need that co-host type of person that's going to add, because what you edit all my writing, so you kind of know where I'm thinking, what I'm thinking before I even say it sometimes. Challenges clearly were when we did 2 a week for 8 weeks so that we could have 8 episodes in the can, so to speak. And then I got kind of lazy because I didn't need to do it. And it's like, oh my goodness, I'm running out of material. I better get going again. So that was tough. And also when we went to recording from two different sites, made Tim's editing much easier.
Yeah. Because
he used to have to try to mute one of us while the other one was talking because there was still some bleed over, which was really hard. So I think that's really what I've learned and what my challenges are. And it's the challenge too of continually, is it fresh? And am I passionate about what I'm talking about? Because if I'm not passionate about it, why should anybody listen? So that's kind of the way I'd answer that.
Yeah, good. And then a similar question that we got to that one was, have we learned anything about each other that we might not have known had we not done this podcast together?
That's a hard question.
I don't know. I feel like we talk so much anyways.
Yeah, I think so.
So
I think I don't think I learned anything about you that I wouldn't have known.
Yeah.
Because we just would have been interacting more in the office.
Yeah.
What people don't realize is that when we did start, literally your desk was right outside my door of my office for the first, I don't know, 2 years maybe? Till we expanded, and then you moved, and then I didn't see you.
Right.
And so it was really good that we had the podcast, because I think the podcast, not so much that we learned anything about us because of the podcast. I think the podcast keeps us connected, especially now that you work from home. Where we still can keep tabs with each other, because what our listeners don't hear is the conversations we have before and after we hit record,
right,
and then stop. Is we catch up on our lives and our families and our kids and that kind of stuff. So I think that's probably the way I would answer that.
All right. The next question is about the future. So what are our plans for the next 100 episodes?
So I've really enjoyed these 2 episodes of Q&A. And I think that our listeners will as well. And from what I'm seeing, from the early information of who listened to the first one, I think that's going to be the case. So I think I would like to do a Q&A quarterly. I think that would be good for us to just continue to solicit questions. So I think that's certainly something we're going to do. We have talked about additional guests and having the 2 of us interview people together. So that's something that's in the works. I've got some plans, and I don't have any concrete issues or concrete plans for this, but I'd like to be doing some interviews with people that are really seasoned leaders and trying to learn from them, and then we can kind of implement that in our podcasts. You and I've talked about maybe a little bit more some book study kind of things. I think we've mentioned where, like, book reviews.
Yep.
Where we may talk about a book that one of us is reading and how we think that could benefit our listeners. And then we'll keep up with, the next page topic is, what is Dave writing, and What's he learning from it?
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any other thoughts?
I agree. I totally agree. And I do really I liked what we did today with we got a very detailed question last week. And the person that sent it in jokingly, said, if you choose to use this, thanks for the mini coaching session.
Right.
Or something like that. And I'm like, that's great.
Yeah.
Like that
it is
great. And so I guess
that's the kind of
that's what we were looking for. Like if you have a question that you think is too much, it's not. Send it.
Right.
Send it along because Dave will write you he will write a post and it'll answer your question. It'll be your own little mini coaching session and it'll be a mini coaching session for everyone else. And then we can spend 25 minutes talking about it. Today was a little different because we had some other questions we had to answer. But I like that format. I think that's great.
I do as well. And if you need a follow-up, send us a question. Send us the follow-up. Mm-hmm. And the other one is no one should think that their question isn't a good one or that they're the only one. You know what? So many people are thinking the same question that individual wrote in about leadership being an introvert with an S or a C, and they never wrote it. Well, thank goodness that this individual did, because now we address it for all the people that didn't have the courage to write it. So, and I really appreciate the fact that he told us he not only listens, but he takes notes. Mm-hmm. And he's been doing it, since 2017. So I think that's awesome that he does that. So I would absolutely say that's it. If, we need to get those questions sent in more frequently so we can answer them. Yeah. Anything else you're thinking about?
I always like when we do series.
Okay.
So I hope we continue to do some of those.
I should be thinking about another series. Huh? Okay. That it does help me because it gives me a thought to think on longer.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
So, yeah. What about this question? Is it possible to run out of leadership topics to talk about? I think what are your thoughts?
I mean, I think no.
Right.
We both love to talk. I feel like we could talk about a lot of things. But I also think we talk a lot about leadership, but we also talk about other things in ways that some of these leadership topics apply to our everyday lives. I mean, I know I'm famous for relating them to parenting as well. So I think we have plenty of topics still in us.
Right. And the reason is that, and you said it so wonderfully, leadership, we take the leadership principles and we apply them to life. Mm-hmm. Whether we're parents, grandparents, leaders in faith communities or social organizations. And the reason why we're never going to run out of topics is because people continue to grow and change and society continues to change, and what we haven't talked about yet may not have been thought up yet. I mean, just look at how the digital world has changed how we do things. I can conceive of a question at some point of, how do you sustain leadership when people aren't working in the same facility? Mm-hmm. How do we maintain connectivity? How do we add value to people when we aren't seeing them, or type of thing? So I think there's so much happening all around us that we'll never run out.
Agreed.
So the last question somebody asked was, do we have any co-host or special guests? And we've got some folks we're talking about, but nothing that we can release yet.
Exactly.
How's that?
Yeah.
I just felt a little bit like John Maxwell talking about Live to Lead. Well, we're talking to people. We're in discussions, but we haven't. But it's true. We've got some ideas, but we aren't at a position where we can name names and set dates.
Yep.
But hopefully soon. Mm-hmm. So we answered all the questions, and we're just about where we typically end.
Yep.
So any special plans for the weekend?
No, nothing special. How about you?
Well, believe it or not, my second oldest grandson turns 7.
Wow.
And the birthday party is going to be at the baseball stadium.
Oh, that's so fun.
Syracuse Mets.
That's so fun.
So, yeah, Ethan loves baseball, and so by the time this airs, it's already over with.
Yeah.
But yeah, tomorrow even my parents are going to go to the stadium for the baseball game. My mother says, "I'm going to a baseball game." I said, "Yes, you are, and I'm picking you up." So we're kind of excited about that.
Oh, and you should have great weather.
I think so.
Good. That'll be so fun.
So with that, I'm Dave Freund.
I'm Marissa Norcross.
And this was The Next Page.